right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Brian Rosbert. I'm the Executive Director of Housing Colorado, and I just want to take a moment to thank the nearly 100 of you who registered for our legislative wrap-up. I know that some are still arriving and being admitted to the waiting room, but I want to go ahead and get started. I'm so glad that you're interested in our policy work and the outcomes for the 2021 session. We'll be spending about 30 minutes presenting, and we'll save the last 30 minutes of our hour for Q&A. We ask that you mute your microphone when you're not speaking and to ensure that everyone can hear. And if you'd like to use the chat function to ask questions, please do. We'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation. We'll try to get to all questions during the Q&A. We're recording today's session, and for those who registered, you'll receive a copy of the webinar in the coming days. So before we get too far, I just wanted to lay out for you where we'll be heading for today's session. We'll, just so we're on the same page about the housing picture in our state, we'll have a little bit of context setting, and then we'll have a session overview from our two lobbyists, Amy Atwood and Jennifer Mello. Then we'll dive into some of the legislation that affects the affordable housing community and that went through in this legislative session. And then finally, we'll have some time for your questions. I'd like to just take an opportunity before we get all the way in to thank our legislative committee for their hard work this year through the session. This group of individuals gave their time and energy to help shape our policy priorities and to recommend positions for the Board of Directors of Housing Colorado to take on particular pieces of legislation. So thank you, legislative committee. These folks are amazing individuals and have really served our organization well this year. I also want to take a moment to thank ELENA Wilken for her steady leadership of our policy work through the past several months. She's, I think, off rafting and enjoying some time away, but our gratitude goes out to her in absentia. So thank you for everyone who helped shape this legislative session. It was not an easy one. We endured the pandemic setting for another session, but we made it through. Just want to set the context a little bit for everyone who's on the call today, just so we're on the same page. Just a little bit about Housing Colorado. Housing Colorado believes that safe, stable, and healthy communities are built upon the foundation of housing. We are a nonprofit membership organization working with the housing community to educate and advocate for the building of preservation of housing for low to middle income Coloradans. We are a unified voice of nearly 300 organizations and over 6,000 individuals across the state who represent diverse housing perspectives. Now, I think we all know that Colorado has a housing problem. I think we're too aware that short supply and high demand have made the housing prices soar, and this has left a lot of folks out of reach of housing that's attainable and affordable. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition puts together an annual report called Out of Reach, which documents the so-called housing wage for each state. This wage is what it would cost to afford a two-bedroom rental in the state. And for Colorado, we come in at the 9th highest housing wage around the country. Colorado comes in with a housing wage of $26.45 an hour. As you might be able to deduce, that's not enough money for Colorado's lowest wage earners to afford without being cost burdened.
Nick, where's the statistical summary?
Sorry about that, which means they're spending over 30% of their income on housing related costs. We know, in fact, that over 25% of Coloradans spend more than 50% of their income on housing, putting these residents at financial risk and destabilizing our communities. As a state, we need to continue to build and preserve housing that is attainable and affordable for all of our Colorado residents. One of the ways we can do that is by enacting policies at the state and local level that clear the way for responsible development to occur. Our work in the halls of power has the potential to move the needle on the housing crisis we face. To speak a little bit more deeply about the inner workings of the legislature this year, I'd like to invite Amy Atwood and Jennifer Mello to spend a little bit of time sharing a session overview with us. Amy and Jennifer, if you would take it away, and I've got some slides that go along with your presentation.
Great, perfect. Thank you, Brian. I'm Amy Atwood, Atwood Public Affairs. I'm a contract lobbyist, and Jennifer Mello, she'll introduce herself, but we both have separate firms, but we come together and partner working with Housing Colorado. And this has been our second session working with Housing Colorado, and it certainly was a long session. If you want to move to the next slide. The session started January 13th and just ended last Tuesday, but it really felt like an 18-month session. If you remember way back January of 2020, we started, things were humming along normally, and then everything shut down for all of us. So then we took a very long break from March on, but the work never stopped. It was an election year, but we came back for special sessions. The governor had a number of executive orders, many of which that dealt with housing. And it really just felt like we've had an 18-month session. So we're ready for a break. Legislators are ready for a break, and time to enact the legislation that was put into place over the last 18 months. So next slide, please. So when we look at the big picture of what happened this year during the session, housing really was a very large part of that, but we also had criminal justice reform that was including expanding the police accountability law from last year, 217, if you remember that, speedier hearings for criminal defendants, chemical restraints were addressed, eliminating certain fines for juveniles to pay. The next was healthcare insurance option. So if you remember health insurance option, public option, we've heard a lot about that. It has been on the table for a number of years and is a priority of Governor Polis. And the bill went through many iterations and amendments. And really now it can be categorized as a new standardized health insurance option for the individual and small group markets. And it has to be priced 15% lower than current offerings and has to be available all across the state in every county across the state. Another big bill or area was transportation funding. Actually, the governor signed the big transportation. I think he signed it yesterday on Floyd Hill. If not, it's today. I think I got a press release that it was yesterday, but approximately $5 billion in new sources of dedicated funding to expand existing transportation infrastructure, invest in the infrastructure needed for electric vehicles, mitigate environmental and health impacts of the transportation system. So not only is there federal money coming in that is still to come in from President Biden's infrastructure plan, but $5 billion here in the state. If you remember, there have been a number of ballot measures they haven't been able to pass. And so this was a way to do it through legislation. If we look at tax exemptions to increase taxes paid by higher income families and corporations and decrease taxes paid by lower income families. And then single-use plastics, a significant elimination of single-use plastic products. And this is another agenda item that has been on the table for many years and was able to get across the finish line this year. One of the sticking points was local preemption, and that was the local preemption piece was added at the very, I think it was on the floor in the last chamber. So we had a lot of bills that that were not finished until the last week. We could have finished the session on Saturday, the 12th, and they did finish a few days earlier, but they closed the 2021 session. So if they were to come back for a special session, and there's no discussion of that, if they were to come back for a special session, it would need to be called either by the governor or the legislature. But there's been some question because they left for 4 or 5 days on the table. Does that mean they can come back? They can't just reopen the session. It would have to be a special session. Jennifer, you want to take over?
Absolutely. And Brian, if you could move to the next slide, that would be so helpful. You know, we certainly acknowledge that this is a group of folks who care about housing and affordable housing in particular. The reason why we wanted to give you some of those other priorities that the legislature focused on is because I think it's always really important to understand the overall context, right? So as we interact with legislators on your behalf, as you all interact with legislators, it's important to know the other things that they are thinking about and worrying about. I think so often in our society, we all get in our own little bubbles, and it's important to, I mean, our bubbles matter. We should work in our bubbles. At the same time, we want to make sure we're understanding, you know, the context that the people we're working with are working in. You know, politically speaking, there's no doubt that the Democrats are really settling into their power. This is the 3rd year in a row now that we've had Democratic majorities in both the House and the Senate and a Democratic governor. The Democrats expanded their majority in the Senate in the election last year in a way that was meaningful. They picked up 2 seats, and there's now 20 Democrats in the Senate, 15 Republicans. That makes a difference. It was only 18 Democrats before, and two matters a lot. It gives them a lot more cushion when they're working to do things that are important to the majority of Democrats. It's clear that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is on the ascendance. It is, for the most part, driving the legislative agenda. Now, that is not entirely true, and there are moments when Democrats of more moderate persuasion come together to essentially work against progressive Democratic proposals. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen on occasion. The Republicans are, you know, definitely in the minority, and there's a really different approach, I would say, on behalf of the Senate Republicans and the House Republicans. The House Republicans are in a bit of disarray. They're not very unified. They have a far right wing flank, and then wouldn't even call it a more moderate flank. I would just say it's, you know, people who can work with other people. So they've got lots of challenges and conflict, and that translates into a lack of effectiveness on their part. It's the Republicans have a little more influence in the Senate. They've got some moderate members in the Senate that work with Democrats a lot, so that's part of it. And I don't know. I mean, a lot of it is personality, right? But I think the relationship between the Senate Democrats and Republicans is stronger than we see in the House. There are a whole number of things happening over the interim. There's a whole bunch of interim committees. We didn't do those last year because of COVID, but there'll be a bunch of them. We've got a report we've written for you all that details all of that. The one that you guys want to care about the most is actually a task force. It's not officially an interim committee, and it will have both legislative and non-legislative members on it. But it is to come up with a plan to spend another $450 million in federal dollars on affordable housing. So that's one that we've been watching closely on your behalf. We'll continue to do so, and will be of most interest to this group. Next slide, please. Thank you. Speaking of money, see, this has worked out perfectly. Money was a huge theme of this particular legislative session. I mean, it's always a theme to some extent, don't get me wrong, because adopting the budget and the School Finance Act are requirements on the legislature. But even more so this year, and really in 2 ways. There was stimulus, and there were 2 components to stimulus. So there was federal stimulus, and I know we've all heard a lot about that. We've had essentially 3 big federal packages of stimulus dollars that have come down to the state. The most recent one adopted right after the first of the year. Those dollars are coming to the state now. It's almost $4 billion with the B dollars in money that's just money coming into state level entities. There's additional money coming into the state that's not controlled by state entities. So it is a ridiculously large, not ridiculous in a bad way, but just kind of unfathomably, I didn't say that very well. It's a really, really big number. It's a lot of money. And the federal dollars are all one time in nature, right? And so I think the legislature and our governor are trying to be very thoughtful about that, right? Let's not spend one-time money on ongoing things, and recognizing the opportunity for some transformational change given the scope of these dollars. So federal dollars coming in. Additionally, we had what we called state stimulus, or we didn't call it that, they called it that. And with that was about $800 million. Where that came from is last year when COVID hit in March, everybody was, none of us knew exactly what the impacts were going to be, right? Like it was very, remember, things still feel a little uncertain. Remember how uncertain it felt back last March and April, like over a year ago. And so as a result, the legislature took some pretty drastic decisions to cut back on the budget. Turns out they cut back way more than they needed to. The revenues came in more strongly than anticipated. And that's what created, again, one time, this $800 million surplus for stimulus. So it was very confusing. The word stimulus, I feel like nominating for the most confusing word of the legislative session because everything was stimulus and it was really confusing to track which one and where and all of that. I think the thing that's important to note going forward from the budget process is that we are being told that we have a long-term structural deficit in the budget. So it felt, I mean, this year it just felt like there was money everywhere. There was so much money, in some ways we didn't know what to do with it. That is not likely to be a permanent challenge for us. In fact, there's some projections that the budget's going to get pretty tight moving forward in terms of expenditures, revenues, and how those true up. As Amy mentioned, the Democrats have tried to address this a little bit by making some changes around tax policy that they can do within the confines of the Tabor Bill of Rights. So they're trying to work on the revenue side of the equation a little bit. And they've had some success in doing so, and that will certainly help with the magnitude of that structural deficit. But the governor's office is telling, they're all working through their budget process now for next year, the state agencies. And the governor's office has told state agencies that they should submit a flat budget. They should not be asking for increases. So that's just a marker of what at least some people think we're heading into. And that concludes, I think, mine and Amy's part. We're happy to answer any questions or defer to you, Brian, on how you want to handle all of that.
Let's hold questions to the end. And I appreciate you both, Amy and Jennifer, your wisdom and insight into the workings of the legislature, and your effectiveness at representing us is just so appreciated. I'm so grateful that you're a part of our Housing Colorado team.
Thank you.
Let's move on to some of the important pieces of legislation that moved through the legislature this year. We had a pretty successful year in terms of how Housing Colorado represented itself at the Capitol. We supported 11 bills, and each of those 11 bills passed through both chambers of the legislature and have either been signed or are awaiting signature from Governor Polis. At the outset of the session, we identified 4 priorities that we'd like to see come to fruition. As you will see, many of these priorities came to be realized through the course of this session. And those priorities were to maintain and secure maintain existing and secure additional funding for and financing for affordable housing, spur affordable housing development, both multifamily rental and for sale, increase home ownership opportunities for low and moderate income households, and to work to ensure equity in the landlord-tenant relationship. The first important point, though, to talk about is money. I know Jennifer talked a little bit about the budget, but beginning in March 2020 and continuing since then, there have been large infusions of cash into the state for all matters of things, including for housing in the form of rental and mortgage assistance. In fact, through the pandemic, over $700 million has been allocated using a combination of state and federal money for housing assistance programs. In late May and early June, the legislature worked diligently to allocate that nearly $4 billion of American Rescue Plan money that Jennifer was talking about coming into the state. As a part of that work, the legislature passed House Bill 211329, and this bill seeks to deal with $550 million that was set aside for affordable housing. In the bill, 98.5 million of that was allocated to the Division of Housing already. $1.5 million was dedicated to the Eviction Legal Defense Fund, and the remaining $450 million will be allocated likely in the 2022 session. And this bill sets up that interim process that Jennifer was talking about, by which recommendations will be made to the legislature for how to spend the money. Given that this is a unique opportunity to invest in housing that is affordable for low to moderate income Coloradans, we hope to influence this process and are already working with a small group of housing policy folks to establish a framework for what we'd like to see included in those recommendations. And I'll just give a plug here. If you have any ideas, even wacky off the wall ideas, please feel free to email me, or if you'd like to be included in some of those conversations, please let me know. The final thing I'll say about money from the 2021-22 budget is that there were 3 things to be aware of. First is that the vendor fee revenue produced by House Bill 19-1245 was restored, which adds $52.6 million into the Housing Development Grant Fund. With the voter adoption of a higher tobacco tax in November of 2020, an additional $11.2 million will be added. And the legislature this year did not accelerate the timing of the transfer of $30 million from the Unclaimed Property Trust Fund. So that is still slated to kick in fiscal year 22-23. So that's enough talk about money. Let's shift gears and talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our DEI statement at Housing Colorado reads that we are committed to advancing policies that reverse the legacy of racism and discrimination in the housing industry. We seek to dismantle systems and barriers that prevent people of color and marginalized individuals from accessing thriving, inclusive communities. And so to that end, we've worked hard to use this commitment as a lens that we view our policy efforts through and support legislation that promotes equity in the area of housing. 2 particular bills this year dealt with DEI issues in housing that we'd like to highlight. The first was House Bill 21-1054. This one eliminates the requirement to verify a person's immigration status before giving them access to a public housing benefit, unless it's required by federal law. And so this bill passed and is awaiting signature. And the second bill, House Bill 21-1108, expands the list of protected classes to redefine sexual orientation and adds gender identity and expression to that list of protected classes. This bill prohibits discrimination based on these characteristics in a number of fronts, including employment, housing, financial services, healthcare, among others. In addition to these 2 bills, our commitment to DEI made itself known as we worked to amend House Bill 21-1271 to include racial equity assessments as a part of the context setting that local governments use when applying for grant funds from the Department of Local Affairs. And while the end language wasn't as robust as we hoped for, we were able to start a conversation about putting together funding and racial equity assessments in terms of how local governments look at their communities when thinking about housing. So that was an exciting development. To turn our attention from DEI commitments to the landlord-tenant equity work, this session saw the expansion of tenant rights, especially as they relate to the eviction process. The more comprehensive of these 2 bills, and the one that Housing Colorado supported, was House Bill 21-173, which makes numerous changes to the eviction process itself, including defining the removal of a tenant from a dwelling without proper court procedures as an unfair or deceptive trade practice. A trial date must be set no sooner than 7 but no more than 10 days after a defendant files an answer with certain exemptions for COVID. And landlords must accept payments for the total amount of rent due at any time until a court has ordered a writ of restitution. In addition to those and other changes, the bill also prohibits landlords from charging late fees unless the payment is late by at least 6 calendar days, charging a late fee exceeding $50 or 5% of the past due rent obligation, and initiating eviction procedures solely as a result of failure. It prohibits them from initiating eviction procedures solely as a result of failure to pay late fees. So there's much more in this bill, and we're hopeful that it will bring equity to the landlord-tenant relationship. Finally, I'd like to highlight a number of bills that Housing Colorado supported that have the intention of increasing the stock of affordable housing in our state. The first of these is House Bill 21-1117. This is the so-called Telluride Fix Bill. House Bill 21-1117 clarifies that the existing authority of local governments to plan for and regulate the use of land, that it includes the authority to regulate development or redevelopment to promote the construction of new affordable housing units. So in other words, local governments can use tools such as inclusionary zoning ordinances to develop affordable housing, provided that there are alternatives for developers or property owners. The bill does require local governments to pursue other avenues to inclusionary zoning, such as zoning changes to promote density or permit ADUs, among others. And the governor already signed this bill into law. Two other bills that we tracked and supported were House Bill 1271 and Senate Bill 242. They each authorized and allocated some of that state stimulus money to increase the stock of housing across the state. The first, 1271, creates 3 different programs in the Department of Local Affairs that offer grant money and other forms of state assistance to local governments to promote innovative solutions to the development of affordable housing across the state. And the programs include an incentive grant program, planning grant program, and a toolkit program, each administered within the Department of Local Affairs. The second bill, Senate Bill 242, expands the use of the Housing Development Grant Fund in DOLA. The funds may be used for tenancy support services, including those that target individuals experiencing homelessness, and for grants and loans to local governments and nonprofits for the rental, acquisition, or renovation of underutilized hotels, motels, and other properties to provide non-congregate shelter or affordable housing. This is an exciting development that authorized this kind of spending and also allocated some state stimulus dollars to do that for some projects. We supported a number of other pieces of legislation through the session, but these are just the highlights of a session that had a very positive outcome for housing, particularly that which is affordable. Housing Colorado is grateful to the many state legislatures and the governor who made housing an integral part of their agenda for this year. We still have a long way to go to make housing available and affordable for all Coloradans, but this year's session was a very good start. So it was an exciting session. We're really, again, thankful for our legislative committee, for ELENA, for Amy, for Jennifer, and again, to all those legislators and the governor for what happened this year. Before we get to questions, I just want to give a plug for 2 things that we've been working on here at Housing Colorado. The first is some work that we've been doing around messaging about housing in our communities. And thanks to the generosity of the Colorado Health Foundation and CHAFA, we have embarked on a project we're calling the Essential Foundation, how to talk to Coloradans about housing. In this program, this guide that we've created and the trainings that are going to go along with it, we're going to be sharing best practices for speaking positively about housing in general and housing that is attainable in particular in communities around the state. We're excited to be previewing this guide over the summer, and we'll officially launch it at our conference in Breckenridge in October. The second plug I want to give is for our end of legislative session happy hour, which will be in a couple weeks on June 30th at Illegal Pete's on South Broadway. We hope that you can join us for a time of networking and just plain seeing each other as we celebrate the end of legislative session and the beginning of summer. There are lots of other events on our website, and we hope that you can join us for some of them in the very near future. Here's my contact information if you'd like to email me any of those wacky ideas for the interim process. They don't have to be wacky, they can just be good, plain, solid ideas, but please send those my way. Well, now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll turn to questions that folks have. Please feel free to unmute yourself or write questions in the chat. And sorry, my presenter mode was showing. I apologize for that. I'm just seeing now the chat. The fun of Zoom. So I apologize for that, but you saw the slides. They were important. Any questions for myself, for Amy, for Jennifer about the legislative session, about some of the legislation we supported, or any other questions that you might have? Wow, no questions. What are our hopes, dreams, fears for the next legislative session? I think we're going to be working through the summer on our policy priorities. I think the biggest thing that we're going to be looking at is those one-time American Rescue Plan dollars that that work is going to be intense. I think there's going to be a lot of priorities that get lifted up, and making sure that those are, again, we won't be able to set up infrastructure with those dollars, but I think making sure that those dollars get spent in the most effective ways to build as many units, to enable the building of as many units as possible. I think that that's the big thing. Jennifer, Amy, you have any fears?
Gosh, we just finished. We're still summarizing everything. I mean, I'm sure there's lots to be scared of, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Maybe Amy's got some.
I think what Jennifer said about the budget and looking forward, that even with all of the money that came in this year that can be spent over the next 3 years, it doesn't mean that we are in a stable budget environment. We have a revenue forecast tomorrow morning, so that will be interesting to see what the project. We get them every quarter. Anybody can listen to them. They're through the Joint Budget Committee tomorrow morning at 9 or 10. But we're hearing inflation costs. We're hearing the continual increase in housing costs. Lumber prices have actually come down. Steel prices have come down. But those are the kinds of things that when I look forward into next year, is what is the long-term impact of the pandemic? We don't know that yet. We're still kind of not quite in the thick of it, but there certainly will be impacts going into next year.
And Barb asks, can Housing Colorado impact or join the membership of the task force on the stimulus funding? We are working with a small group of housing policy folks already to come up with a framework. I believe that, and Amy and Jennifer, you can correct me, that the task force will be announced probably sooner rather than later. The bill still needs to be signed by the governor to be able to kind of enact that. But we will be doing our best to influence that process, whether it's inside or from the outside, with the backing of very smart housing policy folks. So we'll be trying to put together a framework and a kind of have the collective power of many organizations thinking about framework and for priorities for that conversation.
Brian, I see there's a couple questions in the chat. One is about the discussion of a statewide eviction moratorium bill that was never introduced. I think as the pandemic kind of took its course and evolved the way it did through session, combined with some of the executive orders, some of the federal action, a determination was made not to introduce that legislation. In terms of the source of the federal dollars, those are federal tax dollars. So it's the taxes we pay at the federal government. They take that money, combine it, and send it back to the states through all the different stimulus bills and other mechanisms.
And Tom asked, do you have any information on the bill establishing funding for artists' live workspaces? I think that was Senate Bill 252.
I think it passed. I believe it's in our report. If you could maybe help us understand a little bit more what you're looking for. I mean, do you just want a summary of the bill, or I'm happy to get you whatever you want, but I do believe that the legislation was adopted.
And that bill authorized and allocated some money for kind of downtown commercial spaces, retail, strip mall kind of ideas in terms of creating some spaces for housing and for artist space. But I do believe that that bill will pass. That bill passed as well. We decided to monitor that bill just because it didn't have a ton of impact on affordable housing, but we were aware of it through the session.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? And folks, feel free to unmute and ask questions or any reflections on the session. If there are none, we'll give you some time back in your day, but just again, a plug for happy hour on June 30th. That's listed on our events page on our website, housingcolorado.org. There are lots of other summer events listed there, so please take a look. Again, our conference will be in October 13th through 15th in Breckenridge, and registration will open for that in mid-July. So keep an eye out on that. And yeah, with that, unless there are any other questions, we'll let you go.
Just Amy, and on my behalf, thank you for letting us represent you. We really, it's a pleasure, and it's great work, and we're really grateful for the relationship.
We so appreciate you all. So, all right, well, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and we will see you soon.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.